Hello, welcome to the next episode of The Boost. My name is Leon Hitchens.
I'm Pablo Calvo.
Today we're at Geekdom and we're talking something near and dear to me, accessibility on the internet.
For joining us, guys. Today we're going to talk about accessibility, and I know that this is a really important topic for Leon, which we'll get into. But it's going to be a little bit different this time. We're going to have our normal conversational format, but we will also be inviting a guest, Alexandra Britez with Accessibe, to talk about their goals of making the internet more accessible worldwide. So, Leon, I know that this isn't something that you necessarily talk about or promote often, but it's clearly something that you're impacted by. I was just thinking maybe we could talk about how, technology is sometimes made more difficult for you, being that you're in the space and you're a leader in the space, but you still struggle with some things,
Yeah, I think, the biggest part in the backstory is, I've got two good fingers on one hand and I have another hand. Big part is mice are not really built for me, especially being right-handed dominant. Mm-hmm. So what I rely on a lot is keyboard navigation on websites, so tabs and even just like special ones that Accessibe offers. A lot of that's actually built for folks that are blind.
Yeah.
It's pretty useful, but the big part, and this is kind of contested, is how much of the website or the internet is accessible.
Right.
It's somewhere in the range of 2 to 5%, which is abysmal. It's super small, it's super low. And when you think about accessibility, somebody with a disability, we're talking, most people jump to, missing arms, legs, blind, hearing loss, stuff like that.
Right.
But there's so much more nuance to it.
Sure.
We've got a stat here. It's approximately 15% of the world population. Over 1 billion people live with some form of a disability. In the United States, that accounts for about, I think, 20%. That data comes from the World Bank, so it is a lot of people. And to have only a small slice of the internet support this is kind of astonishing. And I know Google's pushed it a lot. Search engine optimization is a big part of accessibility. Alt tags, mm-hmm. Be able to screen read down. But there's a lot more there that I don't think people realize or understand is there, and Google Lighthouse touches on it. It talks about accessibility, gives you a score, but the standards that are out there, it's the
CAG, yeah.
WCAG, the acronym's
2.0, that's right, yes.
That's the best one out there, but it's also not codified into law.
Yeah.
The ADA, Americans with Disability Act, the law, it doesn't, and it never really had an internet component to it. I think it was passed in the 1990s, first Bush, right?
Yep.
So,
right.
First Bush passed it through, changed America, really, set all this stuff out with people for disabilities in the physical realm.
Right.
Justice Department has talked about it. They've referenced that WCAG. Mm-hmm. They've referenced that. They've said that's kind of like the de facto law, but that WCAG doesn't really say what you have to do.
Right.
And that's where the challenge comes from.
Yeah, and it's interesting too is that, in our day job, when we build websites, we've recommended, to multiple clients hey, you should really consider making your website accessible. Well, we're changing the way we're operating now. Now with our clients, it's no longer a choice. It's either you do it or you have to sign a waiver, and there's a reason for it. I mean, from a business owner standpoint, not to use scare tactics, but they're very real. People are being sued, businesses are being impacted every single day.
And not just the big ones either.
Not just the big ones, no. I mean, small businesses, if you have a website, your website is considered public domain as if you had an office. So if somebody visits your website and it's not accessible, you can be sued for not allowing all users equal access to your business. In effect. Unfortunately, there are some bad actors out there that are out there suing, not necessarily because they're trying to help make the internet more accessible. They're obviously taking advantage of the marketplace. But it's still a fact, if someone isn't accessible, if somebody can't use your website, you can become a target. In that, when we started working with Accessibe, the goal was to be able to, educate our customers, to just make it a priority, and I used to always say, like, very early on, that this does or will have an impact on SEO, because the whole goal of Google is to be able to make the internet, accessible to everyone, not necessarily for people with disabilities, but just in general. And Accessibe did share some information with us that there is an impact to SEO results, upwards of 12%. I can't validate that information, but I can say it makes a lot of sense. I mean, in the end, if you're shutting off the internet to people that can consume your information and then they can't do it well, they are not engaging with your content online, it's going to impact your numbers, right? I mean,
it's user experience.
It's user experience, exactly.
I found some stats on that, so we'll put them in the show notes, but it says that around 71% of users with some sort of disability will immediately leave a website if it's not accessible.
Right.
And then two, like when we talk to business owners, one of the things that I've mentioned is this isn't just somebody with disabilities. We've got an aging population all over the world.
Very much so, absolutely.
As you age, your eyes go.
I got these 2 years ago. I know exactly what that means.
And a lot of times that means blowing up text on your phone and all of that. That's an accessibility feature in the end.
Right.
So in the business owner's perspective, it's not just somebody with a disability, not just getting sued. There's like a social responsibility of like, hey, you might not have a disability, you might not be impacted at it right now, but if you're building for a good internet and a good web, you're probably going to help a good portion of your users. You're also going to be able to reach more people. You're going to have an impact to increase your potential market size. Yeah. If a grocery store opens up accessibility, I'm kind of interested to go look at like grocery websites like Walmart, here in Texas, HEB. Like, I'm curious to see if they have accessibility features built in to there, because that is a really huge market, and they are, at the core a public like place, public good.
Right.
And those lawsuits, like Target, Harvard, all of the big ones have been sued, but also in San Antonio was the west side of town. I think Mexican restaurants, there are a dime a dozen here, but they're all delicious.
Right. They're popular for a reason.
Yeah. And they were getting sued, and a $10,000 lawsuit is disruptive, and it's hard to deal with, and
it can break a back for a small business. Yeah. I mean, as small of a nominal amount as it may seem, it's not small or nominal for everyone.
Exactly. So there's like two parts here. It's like, as a small business owner, looking at the risk, looking at the social responsibility, and then looking at the potential market. I think the SEO portion of this is the most interesting, because accessibility is showing up on like Google Lighthouse. Like, Google says accessibility is there. They don't outline it as well as like, well, just like the federal government. They don't really outline it that well. They don't say what you need to do, but they do outline it. And in Accessibe, they've followed the WCAG. And then they've also followed other standards that are out there, and then they've put in a bunch of things. So if you're blind, if you've got hearing loss, or you don't have any hearing, you're deaf, if you cannot use a mouse or a keyboard, like there's a lot of stuff out there that's being accommodated for it. So it is on a business side. I understand it, and most of the time, like if we I've talked to other WordPress developers, there's a portion of people that just don't understand it, don't know what's needed. And then the other portion, they want to charge extra to build and develop those features. So some people go, we'll take the risk and not build those out.
Well, I'll just share one story. So we built a website for a client probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, pardon me. And that client, spent, a fair fee, to have the website built. And then about 2 years after we built it, another company came in to make that website accessible. They didn't rebuild everything. They just simply, added the code base that needed to be added to the core HTML that we had for the site to make the website, accessibly compliant, right? And the issue there was that the cost for that service was almost double what we charged to build it originally. So this isn't something that necessarily is cheap, which obviously works against someone that has a good heart, wants to make their website accessible, maybe didn't do it on the front end, so it ends up being more expensive. So anyway, Accessibe allows you to add code to your site, an existing site, to take components on that website to make them accessible. So it takes care of a lot of the the components that need to be addressed without having to go in and reinvent the wheel. While I do think that it is a good practice to just simply build the website fully accessible from the beginning, that's why we started working with Accessibe, because we feel like the tools are allowing the smaller business owners that don't necessarily have the budget to rebuild their website. The goal in the end is to be able to become accessible without necessarily spending a ton of money. Absolutely.
So
It's an insurance plan. I mean, in the end, you're insuring yourself against the possibility, because in the end, if you are sued, you just have to prove that you're making a reasonable effort, right? It is a reasonable effort. I mean, no one can say, look, I added this tool, to make my website accessible. And, if someone tries to litigate, they can't make the argument that you didn't attempt to address it. If there's things that still need to be addressed, good, you get an opportunity to handle those things. So, I think in general, besides the legal ramifications, look, let's just think of it from a standpoint of just being a good citizen, right? I mean, you want, the number is like roughly 27% of Americans?
yeah, I think the conservative number that you get from like the American disabilities is 1%.
Okay. What I had seen from the CDC.gov was that 27% of Americans are considered to have some type of disability. I mean, that's more than 1 in 4. You would never in your right mind have a business that ignores, over a quarter of the population.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't do it.
And I'm looking at the tool right now. There's seizure safe profile. I would have never
Thought of that.
No, I don't. I see it on TV, hey, there might be flashing lights and seizures. That's a hidden disability. You would never know. There's vision impaired profiles, obviously. That's maybe a bad way to say it, but that's something you can kind of tell. You can see.
Sure.
You have ADHD friendly profile. More focus, fewer distractions. That's another hidden disability that I wouldn't have considered a disability off the top of my head, but it can be, and it is. There's cognitive disability profiles, reading and focusing, kind of tied into that ADHD. There's keyboard navigation with motor. That's what I use a lot.
Sure.
And then there's blind users, which are screen readers. And then they have other things like highlight titles, highlight links, text magnifier, align center left, adjust line heights, contrast, changing saturations, making it monochromatic if you're colorblind. These are all things that I don't think a lot of people would consider a disability. Colorblindness,
Right.
ADHD, but it is, and it impacts you on a website that
Right.
has animations, that has things that are moving and bothering you. If a lot of times my biggest gripe is everyone sets the web font to like 14, and I'm like, I want it at like 18 or 20.
I can't stand that.
Yeah, I'm like,
Especially on
default is
mobile.
20.
Mobile
Oh.
is terrible. Yes.
Even though phones have gotten bigger, the pixel density is higher, and I feel like the text keeps getting more small. But
First of all, anyone's coding with pixels anymore? It's REMs, people. REMs, not pixels. But anyway, that's another topic.
it's stuck in our ways. But
Yeah.
it is a lot more than people consider, and it is a lot of things that you wouldn't call a disability. But I think you said it was called A10Y.
Oh, it's A11Y. So
A11Y, ally.
yeah, ally, right?
You're just being a good person. You want to make accommodations for people, and it's not gonna inconvenience you. You're also going to be able to reach more market, protect yourself from lawsuits, and then I'm sure as a small business, you're going to be able to then have people go, oh my gosh, like thank you for having a seizure safe profile, like thank you for having ability to zoom in text. My father, like at the restaurants, that's always his gripe. On his phone, his fonts are huge, but I'm like, okay. And if he runs across a website that doesn't let the font go to the system font, he's off. He's like, I don't want to deal with reading this tiny stuff. So it's more than just what people think.
Right. Well, look, I mean, just recently we had Super Bowl 58, right? Yeah. One of the bigger advertisers on there was Google, right? They have a Google Frame phone that allows people that are vision impaired to take photos that are in focus, and they're able to, just be more, I guess, participatory in just normal everyday activities that we all take for granted, right? So Google is now releasing a product that is at its core and has an accessible feature, or is intended for accessibility. So, like this goes to show you that this is not just hey, let's just make technology, applicable to a very large swath of the population just because it's a cool thing to do. Look, it's good business, at the end of the day. It's just, you take your leads from what's happening in the marketplace, but, I feel like at the very end, you want to be a leader, for the right reasons. If we talk more about the products, we're probably going to have a very, very long conversation. So we're going to have Alexandra Britez talk to us to give us Accessibe's perspective on what they're doing to solve the the accessibility gap in the marketplace. Alexandra Britez, welcome to The Boost.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited. Really excited to kind of talk a little bit more about accessibility, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to just kind of educate everyone a little bit more about accessibility and talk about the tool itself and our mission. And really excited to just spread more awareness as well. This is a really important topic that needs to be discussed more often than it usually does on a day-to-day basis.
I completely agree. The interesting thing about this conversation is, for me, from my perspective, just hoping to promote awareness is that, for the large part in the business world, people not only are not aware, but they're not really educated on, things that may not personally affect them. So because, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, accessibility, with my, in my past life, I used to work quite a bit in user experience, and it was my first kind of inner engagement, I guess, with accessibility as a topic, you looking at user experience and then thinking about the diversity of what a user actually is, like a user is not just one type of user, it's every user, right? And because of that diversity, you have to think about how people are impacted. And building websites now for, over the past, 20 plus years, it's become much more of a topic, and really it seems to be more prevalent with businesses that work with governments or the federal government. But it feels like this should be something that everyone that has, a website or any type of digital medium should be considering. So, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very excited. And I think to just kind of piggyback off what you're saying, for me, I think when it became super prevalent was just like during the pandemic and COVID itself. Your entire life was revolved around being in the internet more than ever, from grocery shopping, job interviews, working, socializing, or making any kind of transaction was based on the internet. And I thought to myself, wow, like I am doing everything online and I have, I'm so lucky to be able to access everything. But for people that I couldn't even imagine trying to navigate my day-to-day during COVID. And it kind of, made me realize that that's always been the case. It's not just, that moment in time. It's always been the case since the internet was invented for anyone that has any kind of disability.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, and I'm just thinking, for maybe people that have mobility issues, they can't really leave their home as freely as others. So the internet is kind of the connection to the outside world, right?
Yeah.
And then if you have those connections, but they're not really considering your needs, that's got to be terribly frustrating.
Yeah. And I think one of the kind of craziest stats out there that I actually didn't even realize before I started working here is that only 3% of the internet's accessible. 3%.
And that part is just how big the internet is, and to see 3%, it's a small slice of it. And I think what the CDC says, it's like 27% of Americans live with some sort of disability. And like in the pre-record with Pablo and I, we were talking about things that I don't think everyone talks about. It's like as you age, your eyesight just starts to go, and you want to increase that font from 18 to 24. So I think there's a lot of other little parts that people kind of out of sight, out of mind, they don't think it'll impact them. But at some point in time, there is going to be somebody who's their grandparents or their parents that might have something. So it's not just impacting somebody with an issue, but it's also impacting just everybody living.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think one of the big things, I think like there is a big misunderstanding. There's a lot of like solutions and extensions out there, and a lot of them only solve for font size and color. They kind of disregard other disabilities. And I guess like one of the main ones that the WCAG talk about the most is obviously blind people using screen readers, motor impaired using keyboard navigation, epilepsy, color blindness, cognitive and learning disabilities, visual impairments. And a lot of tools that are out there are just kind of utilizing, just font size and color when there's so much more to solve out there. So you're 100% correct. It's, there's way more than just what we think a disability is when we're trying to access a site.
100%. The epilepsy, something I didn't think about, and I don't, generally have to think about, but I do see it on, a TV show of, hey, bright lights flashing. And I've seen websites with bright lights and flashing, and it's never dawned on me. So I think part of this too, in accessibility, is thinking about others around you and just how they use things, how people are interacting with it, and being kind of like the good, citizen is. But you did mention, like the standards. There's the WCAG. I know there's like ADA, which is the overarching one. And then there's, I think 2 or 3 other ones like the S508 that pop up. But any, like what does Accessibe like follow? And then how does like all of these standards kind of come together within your tool?
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of start with like a little bit of a background on Accessibe. So our founders, Accessibe was founded back in 2018. Our founders were basically realizing that making sites accessible were costly, very time consuming. There's tons of maintenance involved. And for a small business, it's almost impossible to basically afford a solution like that or have any kind of manual remediation. So, what we actually did was launch something called Access Widget. So it's the first ever AI machine learning software that was developed with the understanding that business owners need a solution that is simple, affordable, and of course achieves compliance. So the product was actually developed over the course of 2 years side by side with people with disabilities. So a lot of them are leading experts in accessibility and assistive technologies. And now in 2024, we have over 247,000 customers.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And just to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the WCAG, for people as familiar, the WCAG AA compliant level is the globally accepted standard. And basically what it means is it's an 1,000-page guidebook explaining what accessible sites look and operate like with people with disabilities. As I mentioned earlier, it's blind users using screen readers, keyboard navigation for motor impairments, epilepsy, blindness, and learning disabilities. And it's also really important to note that keyboard navigation and screen readers actually make up 80% of the WCAG requirements.
So let me ask you a question. As far as, Accessibe is concerned, in terms of addressing this problem, as far as the business world is concerned, is, the adoption rate at least increasing? Do you see that it's that it's more of a common conversation? Because this is an example. This is now 3 years ago, and I know that you're in New York, right?
Yes.
So there was a client that I had, or at least actually still have, that is in Manhattan, and they had a website built with us. This was probably in 2018 or so. About 2 years later, maybe 2020, 2021, maybe 3 years later, there was another company that was doing accessibility remediation and did a proposal, and they began engaging with that client. And just to throw numbers out, just so you're aware, we built that website for a price tag of about $3,500. And it was a very functional website for very specific things that they needed from just a PR and press perspective. But they had some elements that were not properly accessible. Well, the accessibility remediation business that came in charged $7,500 to make it, fully accessible. And, just to give people an idea of really the, and obviously cost will range, from inexpensive to expensive in any business, but I don't believe that accessibility remediation is one of those areas where people will kind of skimp out on. So the price tag does go up. And look, in a place like New York, where, it's one of the states where, being sued for not having accessible websites, or not being accessible in any medium for that matter, physical or otherwise. But, the thing is that cost was significantly more than what we had charged. And while we are using tools that are, bringing in more of the accessible commentary into the development conversation, like ARIA labels on a web build, those are starting to become more and more integrated into web tools. However, most people don't know how to use them. There's not like an instruction set or manual of what are the best practices to be able to do that. So most of the time what ends up happening is people just ignore it. And then they still remain with that risk. So what I have found is in our business, when we work with a client, we inform them of the risk. We offer them, the ability to work with Accessibe. And it's sort of, takes care of the issues up front as opposed to waiting until someone, notifies them that, they've actively become victims of a lawsuit. That's the way I see it, is like it's a value add from the standpoint of protection. But also, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the market is accessible to everyone. If you're selling a product or service, and I think the note that really kind of jumped out to me as far as inaccessibility in the marketplace is that 27% of the population is affected with some type of disability. So if 27% of the population, is affected, that means that only 73% of the population is available to you for selling a product, market, or service. So it seems to me that would be logical that you would want to open up to every possible user that you could potentially, sell services to. Would you agree that that's a fairly logical statement?
Oh, 100%. And I think, just to kind of piggyback off of that, the three main reasons why people decide to become accessible is ROI. The disability community has $8 trillion in disposable income, but some of them can't even access a site. I know myself, I hate to admit it, I am a huge online shopper. I was never a big online shopper before, and I will spend money, and I'm a huge brand loyalist. There's a lot of people that don't even have that opportunity because they can't access their website. So you're losing out on business, brand loyalists, people that will really ride for your brand and reputation. So you're missing out on all that ROI. But another big thing to note too is a lot of companies also do it for DEI reasons. One big thing that I even heard last week was even for hiring, don't you want to be able to attract different kinds of talent and even let someone apply to your a job opening that you have on your site? Mm-hmm. I think that's huge. So, ROI, DEI, and mitigating risk have always been the top three reasons why people decide to become accessible.
So I have a question for you. Could you maybe share some success stories? Maybe not necessarily dropping company names if you choose not to, but would you be able to share a success story in the space using Accessibe?
Yeah, I think I'll do kind of more like a general one. I'm not really allowed to disclose.
Of course, I understand that.
But I think just one big one that I think about all the time is even having access. I think we work with a lot of people in healthcare, tons of people in healthcare. And I think for them, they obviously treat all types of patients when they come into the office. But I think one big thing when we're talking to maybe a surgeon or a specialist, one thing they forget about is because their entire life revolves around helping other people and doing their job, not necessarily updating their website or, maybe doing certain things. They forget that although there's customers or clients or patients that they have in front of them that they can treat, there's a lot that can't even access their site for them to get new potential patients. And I think that for me is it's so valuable. I know for me, whenever I have any kind of specialist or doctor, one, it's you have a special bond with them. Basically your livelihood is in their hands. But I think with healthcare in general, I think it's so important to be able to give that access to people that can't even, book an appointment on your site. But there's tons and tons of other success stories too, with, maybe brick and mortar stores that became online businesses during the pandemic that are small businesses that decided to start selling things online, and they have more customers coming to their site because it's more accessible. And another thing to note too is, making your site accessible does increase SEO by 12%. So you're putting yourself in front of a lot more people.
That was a point that actually stood out to me because I have been making, and Leon knows, I've mentioned to him years ago, I said, I know that accessibility has an impact on user experience. So if it has an impact on user experience, it has to have an impact on search engine optimization. And, the facts just weren't really promoted by Google or any of the major search engines. So I really couldn't make those claims. but 12%, I mean, that's a significant, I guess, increase in user engagement.
Yeah, no, definitely. SEMrush actually did the study back a couple of years ago. They have some amazing stats that they came out with too. And they kind of go more in depth into it as well. But I know it's something that I actually didn't even know as of, until I started working here too.
Yeah, so let me ask you that question then. What brought you to Accessibe?
Yeah, I think, I guess like I kind of think back on like the last couple of jobs that I've had, and they've been great tools, but they're not changing the world in any way.
Yeah.
Hope my old employers don't listen to this.
They might agree with you.
Yeah, but it's not doing anything like groundbreaking for everyone. It's just doing something kind of maybe groundbreaking for their specific industry. And in this instance, we're working with all types of people all over the world trying to do something better. And like I mentioned, I think like the biggest shock for me was just the fact that only 3% of websites are accessible. Like, I think that's insane because we live day to day on the internet, on our phones, on our laptops. And like, I know, like, obviously I mentioned COVID earlier, but a lot of that got passed down like to now too. Like, people are still working remotely. People are still getting like groceries delivered to their like home. But I think, I think that's been the big thing. It's just a great mission. It's, trying to make websites more accessible for everyone.
I would agree. Leon, do you have any additional comments?
No, the one thing is, the keyboard navigation, I use it a lot. Like, normal mouse is not great. Then, Microsoft has, to those mobility ones, they've done a lot of accessibility, and there's a big push for that, I think, post-COVID, but a lot of people shop online. There's a lot of that. So I do appreciate when I come across a site that's got Accessibe or they got keyboard navigation, because it lets me keep my hands on the keyboard and not have to like fiddle with a trackpad or a specialized mouse. But just hearing all of it, from the increase in SEO, I think you guys have some other stats too in terms of like increase in organic traffic. Like, it was 50% up. Those are some really good metrics for a small business that went online. I've seen like even plant stores go online, and like you can't even press the checkout with a keyboard navigation or tab over in the fields, and that's one of the most infuriating things to see that, because I'm like, oh man, let me navigate, and then it doesn't click in the right spot. But I think it's like that moral kind of obligation of just being around and being helpful around you. It's the same thing as putting a ramp into your building, and that's what these business owners have to start considering is, hey, do I have that ramp into my building? Do I have stairs that might not be there? And if I do, hey, there's a label somewhere that says, hey, there's flashing lights, hey, there's a lot of colors, like stuff like that. I just think putting it out there is really good, and I think it's a cause, and seeing Accessibe shepherd that along and talk about it, pull these stats and kind of frame it in not just that doing good on the internet, but also you're opening up business space, you're opening up more SEO, and then you're just getting more business. I think is going to encourage a lot of these business owners to kind of think of it, frame it, and then talk about that ROI, because in the end, a business just needs to see how does investing in something, no matter what it is, there. I know, on the side that I think 21 or 22 was the biggest, year of lawsuits for ADA in California and New York.
Yeah.
So there is some fear behind that, but it's not the driving force.
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of like piggyback on what you're saying too, we work with tons of small businesses. We work with, some enterprise, but I would say like a majority of people that work with us are small businesses. And a lot of those small businesses, kind of like Pablo, an experience that you had like years ago, they got a quote for manual remediation and kind of freaked out because it's more than what they expected. And I think it's also just important to note that I think actually a lot of small business owners don't know too. They're trying to do the right thing, but maybe like they're a little nervous about what the cost is. We have pretty transparent pricing, but I would say if you're a small business, if you have less than 30 employees or make less than $1 million, they are eligible to get money back every single year they decide to make their websites accessible. I think it's something that isn't talked about as much, but for small businesses that maybe can't afford as much as a big enterprise company, that's always something that's, a little bit of a help as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's just part of the education process that, at least from our standpoint in our small, digital space here in San Antonio, we're trying to promote as much as possible, just as a default, like this is how we operate. This is how we work. It is a change in business approach. And look, you don't force, a client necessarily to do it, but there's indemnification statements now, because as an agency and a business, I also want to protect my own business. If you're asking me to, work in a condemned space, I don't want to be responsible for when the building comes down. I hate to put it in those terms, but from an agency protection standpoint and a business protection, it's not just the client's business that you're protecting. You're also protecting your agency as well. So it just makes sense. Call it an insurance policy, call it whatever you will, but it's just smart business, in general. So Alexandra, I really appreciate your time joining us today and, spreading the word about Accessibe. And what's the best way for folks to learn about Accessibe?
Yeah, there's actually, all you could do is go on accessibe.com. One good thing is that you can actually do a free audit on your website to see whether you're compliant or non-compliant. It'll kind of give you a little bit of an overview of what the issues may be, or you could just reach out to our support team and they're more than happy to go through a full-blown demonstration with you and actually talk a little bit more in depth about accessibility overall and the widget itself and the problems that you're trying to solve for. But yeah, just going on accessibe.com is
wonderful.
All the research.
We'll put that information in the show notes and make sure people can go find that and navigate to go get that site audit. I think that's helpful.
Oh yeah, it's always really helpful.
Well, thank you again, Alexandra, for joining us on The Boost, and certainly look forward to continuing to work with your organization and yourself.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today on The Boost. We had our special guest, Alexandra Britez from Accessibe. If you want to learn more information about Accessibe and accessibility, you can visit Accessibe at accessibe.com. That's ACCESSIB.com. And you can find us on YouTube at The Boost channel. And then with our new-ish domain, that's theboost.fm. So thank you for joining us today.
See you next time.